This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good evening everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Haba. We're continuing our Shiurim on Sefer. Actually, we're beginning our Shiurim on Sefer Devarim, and we thank Dr. Zakem Umeshpachta, who once again are generously sponsoring the Shiurim. Lila Nishmas of Shlomo Eliezer ben Rabbi Yaakov Zakheim, and Lila Nishmas Dr. Zakem's mother, Rivka Bas Tuvia Halevi, Began Eden Tehim Nuchasam. They should be Melitze Yisharim for their whole family. Ad Bias Goel Tzedek. Tonight's Shiur is sponsored by Mrs. Yehudus Herman of Yerushalayim in honor of her upcoming birthday on Daled Av. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be mevarech her with good health, arichas yamim v'shanim, to see nachas the kedusha from all her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Ad bias goel tzedek. Okay, we have a very important subject tonight. We're now within not only the 3 weeks but the 9 days. If anybody wants to get their sefer on the 3 weeks, The Darkness and the Dawn, it is available at better bookstores everywhere. We're going to speak tonight about a subject relevant to the Holocaust, to the 3 weeks in general, and to a very misunderstood, misquoted, abused concept, and that is the subject of Das Torah. We hear there's something called Das Torah. We know that aside from the halacha, there is a concept that if great Torah sages have a certain opinion, even if we can't necessarily pinpoint what the source is, that has a certain legal standing and it's binding to a certain extent. The question is, what's the basis for such a view? We're now coming upon the 10th yahrzeit. We just passed the 10th yahrzeit of Rabbi Yosef Shalom Elyashiv, who was one of the greatest poskim post World War II. Rabbi Yosef Shalom Elyashiv. Baruch Hashem, I had the zechus to meet him one time in my lifetime. I remember when I was a bacher learning in yeshiva, so we went just to see Rabbi Elyashiv, and I remember there were a few people crowding around him. One guy was showing him cornflakes, one guy was showing him Parshias of mezuzah, another guy was showing him halacha taras hamashpacha. So he's bombarded from, all types from kala Torah kula, and I feel very fortunate to have seen him. So I want to explore a little bit, and this is based on an article that I saw many years ago from Rabbi Yosef Gabriel Bechhofer, and then and some letters that Rabbi Elyashiv wrote that were printed later in the Kovetz Mevakshe Torah, and I think it will give us a little bit of a picture of, to some extent, on our meager level, to understand the thought process of Rabbi Elyashiv when it comes to Piskei Halacha, and to try to glean a little bit, what is this elusive concept of Das Torah? Let's begin with the tshuva. This tshuva is dated Yud Gimel Sivan Tavshin Mem Hey, 1985, the 13th day of Sivan, and the question was addressed to Rabbi Elyashiv from none other than Harav Hatzadik Hameforsam Kavir Hamas V'Rav HaPa'alim, the Kalav Rebbe. Okay, so the Kalav Rebbe is asking a shaila to Rabbi Elyashiv. We recently had the zechus to have the son of the Kalav Rebbe in our shul. This was a question addressed to Rabbi Elyashiv from the Admar of Kalav, and the suggestion of the Kalav Rebbe was a Holocaust survivor, and the suffering of those who perished in the Holocaust always reverberated in his soul. He could never forget the 6 million. Their cry always rang in his ears. He can never divert his attention from thinking about their plight. He cannot be Mesiach Das from them, from their cry that their blood is screaming from the ground. And therefore his suggestion was that he proposed that all Jewish people, at the end of the tefillah, should accept upon themselves the Oil Malchus Shamayim by saying the pasuk Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad after Aleinu Shabeach, and they should be mechavein to be miyachid with the 6 million. They should be mechaven to show solidarity to the 6 million who were burnt on the fires during the Shoah. And this was the proposal of the Kalba Rebbe. At the end of Aleinu Shavech, some in the Siddur anyway, many Sturm, it has the pasuk Shema Yisrael. All Jews should recite Shema Yisrael. They should have in mind that they're unifying with the Kedoshim. And this was the proposal to Rabbi Yashiv as a way of Klal Yisrael memorializing the 6 million. And the Kal Rebbe pleaded with Rabbi Yashiv, please share your opinion on this proposal. And Rabbi Yashiv said, well, you're asking my opinion. I wasn't going to say anything, but now that you're asking me, he said, you should know that after the Shoah, the Chachamim, the Gedolim of the time, gathered together, contemplating establishing a public fast day to mourn the loss of the Kedoshim. And it is well known that the Chazon Ish greatly opposed it. He opposed it with great vehemence. Chazon Ish said it was wrong to do so. Why? And he enunciated the following idea. Our generation is not worthy to establish anything. We are not qualified to make an enactment. For our generation, the operating principle is Toiv loy hashtika. Silence is best. Silence means don't talk, don't do, don't enact, don't legislate. We're not qualified. So that's the first point. The first point is, the Chazon Ish said, we are not qualified to make calendar dates. We are not qualified to make prayers. We are not qualified to do anything. And number two, says Rabbi Yashiv, with all due respect, Rebbe, I don't know what you're talking about to be united with the Kedoshim. What source is there in Chazal that you should unite with people who perished? There's no basis for that. And if there's no basis for that, you're not allowed to do it. Now, you might ask, well, where does it say you're not allowed to do it? It seems like a good idea. Does it say somewhere you're not allowed to do it? So we see from Rabbi Yashiv that sentiment is not an adequate basis for policy. The fact that you feel something is not a legitimate reason to make a legislation, even if the policy doesn't clash with halacha. So the question is not, well, what's wrong? Why can't I do it? What's wrong? The question is, where is it sourced that you should do it? And if it's not sourced, then you're not allowed to. There are many times where there are contemporary issues. Well, where does it say that women can't? Or where does it say that this should not be done? That's not the correct perspective in halacha. The perspective is not where does it say that you can't. The perspective is that if you don't have basis in Chazal that this should be done, then you're not allowed to do it. That's the way Jewish practice works. It's not enough where does it say I can't do it. It's what is the source in Chazal. And therefore, says Rabbi Yashiv, in my opinion, let's strengthen what Jews are already doing after Tefillah, namely to learn Mishnayos L'ilei Nishmas Kedoshim that have no remnant, and may the Master of Mercy conceal them in the shade of His wings for eternity. So from this tshuva, Rabbi Yashiv, we see a very important principle, that in Jewish practice, in order to establish something, it's not enough that there's no prohibition. If it's not found in Chazal, you may not do it. You cannot legislate policy based on feeling. Even if there's nothing wrong. Even if there's no halacha that says you're not allowed to do it, if there is no source in Chazal, you cannot do it.
Can I ask?
Sure.
So, how did we implement Tefillah L'Shlom HaMedina in the middle of davening on Shabbos?
I can't speak on behalf of any particular institution, and I'm not employed by this institution, but the same thing would go for something like that, which is the primary reason, let's say, that the Chazon Ish also opposed that prayer as well.
was the Kalva Rebbe thinking?
What was the Kalva Rebbe thinking? The Kalva Rebbe was a great Admar, but Rebbe Yashiv was the preeminent Paisek.
He must have had based it on something.
Now, I would humbly suggest that I think I can find some basis for the notion. In other words, let's try to analyze this. Kalva Rebbe says he's proposing that we should all say Shema and be miyached with the Kedoshim. Like, what in the world does that mean? Does it mean solidarity? Is there some mystical concept here? And I believe he is referring to a mystical concept, and I want to share with you what it is. And it's actually a very powerful concept, and then we're going to have to go back to explain Rabbi Yashiv. There's an amazing Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara says, Yisrael Zayin Amud Beis, not in your sheet. I just thought of it tonight preparing the share. Yisrael Kedoshim Hein. Jews are holy. Yesh Roitzeh Ve'ein Lo. Some people, they want to give $1 million, they don't have money. Right? You have people that have a good heart, they don't have the resources. V'yesh Sheyesh Lo. Some people have Ve'ein Lo Roitzeh, and they don't want. So you have two kinds of people, but all Jews are holy. There's some people who want, but they don't have. Now, that I understand why they're holy. They want to give, they just don't have. And some Jews have, and they don't want. So how are they holy? They have money, and they don't want to give, so presumably they're not giving. So how are Jews who have and don't want, how are they holy? So Tosfos asks, why are they holy? Says Tosfos, they're still called holy. Shemazmin es chaveroi, they do invite their friend. La'achal to eat by them. Mimnei habusha, because they're embarrassed not to. So they have, they give, but they really don't want to. So, the Slonim Rebbe, in a sefer on the Holocaust called Kuntras HaHaruga Alecha, he quotes the question of the Rebbe Reb Zusha. You ever hear the Rebbe Reb Zusha? He was one of the early Hasidic masters. The Rebbe Reb Zusha asked on Tosfos, says, I understand the one who wants to give and he can't give, he's called Kadosh because he wants to. But the one who has and he doesn't want to, so I understand that Tosfos says that he gives out of embarrassment. But ask the Rebbe Reb Zusha, who cares if he gives? If his whole giving is out of embarrassment, Goyim also give out of embarrassment. Why would this person be called holy? So the Rebbe Reb Zusha offered the following major revelation. The Jewish people are one entity. And if we're one entity, as an entity, we offer to God perfect mitzvahs. Now there are two parts of a mitzvah. There's the body of the mitzvah and there's the soul of the mitzvah. The body of the mitzvah is giving. The soul of the mitzvah is wanting to give. Some Jews provide the body, and some Jews provide the soul. So the Jew that gives, even though he doesn't want to give out of embarrassment, is he holy? Or wait a second. He's providing the Jewish people with the body of the mitzvah. And the Jews that wish they could give but can't, they're providing the soul of the mitzvah. And together as one entity, Yisrael Kedoshim Heim. Okay? So, in other words, the Jew that gives, even though he doesn't want to, he's doing something. He's providing the body, and those who really want it, they're providing the soul. The Slonim Rebbe extended this further. He extended this to the principle of sanctifying Hashem's name. He says in the Holocaust, there were many Jews, they were killed. Yes, they were killed because they were Jewish, but they didn't necessarily even know they were Jewish. They didn't necessarily even want to be Jewish. And if Hitler would have given them a choice to renounce their Judaism, they would have happily renounced Judaism to save their skin. You had Jews who renounced their Judaism and didn't want to be Jews. But Hitler tracked them down and tracked down their lineage and killed them anyway. So did those Jews die al Kiddush Hashem? Says the Slonim Rebbe, they died. That was the act. That was the body. There were Jews who said, God, I wish you would take my soul, and they survived. And they provided the soul of the mitzvah. And the combination of the act of certain Jews that died, maybe they didn't even want to, and they did it kicking and screaming, and they didn't even appreciate that they were Jewish. That's the body of the mitzvah. And the Jews that wanted to, that's the soul of the mitzvah. And the Slonimer Rebbe develops this idea that when you say Kriya Shema, where the kavanah is supposed to be that you, if ever put to the ultimate test, you would give up your life al Kiddush Hashem, you should have in mind that your thoughts should join up with those Jews who were actually killed, so you're providing the soul of the mitzvah to those Jews who actually sacrificed their life. So I believe that what the Kalav Rebbe means, that you should say Shema and then be miyached with the Kedoshim, is they physically gave up their life. You should provide the Ratzain to give up your life, and together it sort of fuses a beautiful mitzvah before Hashem. That's what I think the Kalav Rebbe means. But what Rabbi Yashav is saying is, it's a nice idea, it's a nice thought, it's a nice machshava. Actually, the Slonimer Rebbe brings down that the Rebbe Reb Zusha had a dream. And Tosfos himself came to the Rebbe Reb Zusha and explained to the Rebbe Reb Zusha what I mean, that a Jew that gives, even though he doesn't want to out of embarrassment, what I mean that he's holy, is he's holy together with the Jew who wants it. And the Baal Tosfos actually appeared to the Rebbe Reb Zusha in a dream and explained what his kavanah was. And I'm sure Rebbe Yashiv knew that. But that's still not what is considered idea found in Chazal, that we're going to legislate practice based on that. It's a nice thought, it's a nice idea, it may even be true. We will not legislate practice based on that. In order to legislate practice, it must be sourced in the words of Chazal. That's the first idea. I want to share with you another tshuva. Take a look in number 2. This is Krach Aleph of the Tshuvas of Rabbi Yashiv, Kovetz Tshuvas, Siman Kuf Lamed. This is regarding the following shayla. You had people who perished in the Holocaust. They were never brought to Kuras Yisrael. We don't even know where they're buried. So let's now, the proposal was to erect a monument in the cemetery. This commemorates the fall of the city of Pliny Almaini, in memory of the 50,000 Jews that perished in the city, to have a memorial for Jews who perished in the Holocaust. Are you allowed to do that? Why not? What could be wrong with making a memorial? So Rabbi Yashiv looks at the question as follows. In Yardei and Sim Kufayin Ches, we know there's a principle. We cannot walk in the ways of Goyim, and we cannot be similar to them. That's very vague. So now what? Goyim breathe. Right? Gentiles drink water. They wear clothing. Actually, they don't. But, what exactly you're not allowed to do? So the Ramah says it's only prohibited to do things that Gentiles do if they do it out of lewd, immodest behavior, or they do it as a rule without a logic to it. For example, you're about to go to the store, and a black cat passes your path. You come back, you go, Yanko, what are you doing back? I told you to go get me a thing of milk. I can't go. A black cat crossed my path. Now, why do Goyim think that if a black cat crosses your path, you can't go to the store? No reason. It's superstitious. It is forbidden not to do something because the black cat. If that is called following the ways of Goyim, you're over a lav in the Torah. What? Oh, it's pouring outside. Why don't you open the umbrella in the house, and this way you won't get wet? No, you can't open an umbrella in the house. What's going to happen if you open the umbrella in the house? No, it's usher to open an umbrella in the house. No, goyim don't open umbrella because it's superstitious. Now, if the reason you're not doing it is because you're going to break the chandelier, that we understand. But if you have a chandelier up on the ceiling and a big doorway, and this way you're going to keep dry, it is a lav d'oraisa not to open the umbrella. Or there's a ladder. By the goyim, the biggest avera in the world, after woke and other PC, is you can't walk under a ladder. Now, if it's a rickety ladder, I understand you shouldn't walk under. If it's a regular ladder, why can't you walk under the ladder? So the Ramah says, what things are you not allowed to do that goyim do? Either if it's pritzus, or if it's what we call milsa b'litam, something that has no logic to it. So says Rabbi Yashiv, to make a monument, it's not pritzus, and it's not illogical. There's a certain reason you want to have a monument to remember something that happened. So at first glance, it would not be prohibited. However, the Vilna Gaon writes, and he disagrees with the Ramah, and the Gra writes, anything that Goyim do, we cannot copy them. If they innovated it, then we cannot copy them. So when it comes to drinking water, Goyim didn't innovate drinking water, it's a basic human need. Clothing is a basic human need. Any human practice you're allowed to do. But if Gentiles innovate, and we know that, says Rabbi Yashiv, Goyim are very into monuments. You take the curtain and you're covering the monument and everyone gathers there, and then somebody comes and he whips off and everyone goes, ooh, ah, ooh, right? And there's a certain amount of oohs you have to make and a certain amount of ahs you have to make. So this is a Gentile practice. So according to the Goyim, this would be prohibited. However, says Rabbi Yashiv, not so fast, because if we could prove that we innovated it, then even the Vilna Gaon would say it's permitted. And we do find in Tanakh, we find that Avshalom, who didn't have children, he made a monument for himself. So we see that this is a concept that is rooted in our practice, not only the practice of the Gentiles. So Rabbi Yashiv says that maybe at first glance this would be permitted. However, there's another issue. The issue is who owns the cemetery. The Shiltei Giborim writes, a cemetery of a city is like a Beis HaKnesses. It's owned by the community, and it is prohibited for anyone to benefit from it in any way. It is dedicated solely for the burial of the dead, and it is prohibited to make anything there. You can't build an ice cream store there. You can't build anything. It belongs to the community, dedicated for burial. And the Chassam Sofer holds like the Shiltei Giborim. And accordingly, says Rabbi Yashiv, it would be prohibited to make a monument over there. However, this opinion of the Shiltei Giborim is not unanimous. If you look in the Marsham, he quotes the Magen Avram, that a cemetery is not usher to get benefit from. And the only things you're not allowed to do in a cemetery are those things that are disparaging to the Mason. So you can't play shuffleboard in the cemetery. But you want to make a monument, and I don't think, says Rabbi Yashiv, that's not disparaging to the Mason.
Was a matzeva for an individual, not as a group or anything like that?
No, an individual is okay. You mean if he's not buried there?
No, if he's buried there.
No, so that's what a cemetery is. Matzeva is already is a Jewish custom. It's something which is needed by the mace. The mace gets a certain benefit from the matzeva. That's for sure okay. But to have a monument for people who perish and you don't know where they're buried. So one issue is this Gentile practice? It's questionable if it's Gentile practice. It could be it is, but it could be we already find the concept in the Torah, matzeva, namely Avshalom. But then another issue is who owns the cemetery? There are some Achronim say the cemetery is dedicated only for the Mason. Others say no, only a disparaging thing you're not allowed to do there. But now listen to what Rabbi Yashiv says. Says Rabbi Yashiv, even though in a halachic realm, there may be basis to allow a monument, that's din Torah. But das Torah, ein ruach chachamim noicha mizeh. The spirit of the sages doesn't take pleasure from this. In other words, you're right. Maybe you can point chapter and verse and say, oh, this halacha forbids it. But the spirit of the law is not pleased with this practice. So what does it mean, the spirit of the law? What is that supposed to mean? If there's no technical prohibition from any sif in Shulchan Aruch that you're not allowed to do this, so what does it mean the spirit of the law doesn't allow it? What is this concept of the spirit of the law? Apparently what Rabbi Yashav means is that if someone masters the entire corpus of the law, all the halachas in Shulchan Aruch, so even though you can point and say, this halacha says you can't do it, or that halacha says you can't do it, but someone who has a sensitivity and is in tune with the spirit of all halacha, they could sort of have a sixth sense and say, you know what? This is not something that halacha in general would condone or endorse. We don't. This is not something which fits the general approach of halacha. So you can't point and say, well, in the 17th chapter and the 6th halacha, it says there you're not allowed to do this, but someone familiar with the entire, someone who has a sensitivity to all halacha, they're going to recognize, this is there's something here that it does not fit the regular mode of what halacha dictates.
So the Holocaust Museum or Memorial Center, these type of places, is not a proper thing?
It's proper for people who, to make a monument, just a monument for people who perished in the Holocaust?
Yeah, they have that.
Rabbi Yashav is saying it's not against the halacha, but it's not something that the Chachamim are pleased with. He says, Rabbi Yashav, it's therefore better that if you want to memorialize people who perished in the Holocaust, you should advise families that instead of making a monument, they should dedicate something that the living will benefit from. For example, a menorah in the shul, a ner tamid in the shul, svarim in the shul, because it is not within the spirit of Jewish tradition just to do something for dead people.
Yeah, but the concept is so as not to forget, right? It's not so much for the dead people as it is for the people that are living today to make sure that they don't forget, the world doesn't, that they don't forget.
So what Rabbi Yashav is saying, he's saying it's not prohibited.
Right.
It's not a bad thing. It's not someone familiar with the spirit of the law will have a sensitivity that this is not normative Jewish practice, and better to dedicate something that the living. You want to remember the Kedoshim? Do so by dedicating something that the living will benefit from, and will be an Eloi for their neshama. So, is there anything wrong if Gentiles make a Holocaust museum? No, it's a good thing. Should there be like a monument in a shul for Holocaust survivors? Rabbi Yashav is saying, if you would ask me, I would say better that you dedicate a ner that the living benefit from, or svarim, or something that the living gain from. But just a monument or a memorial or flowers, Lefi das Torah ein ruach chachamim noichem mizeh. It's something that those who are sensitive to the spirit of the law, they would have an intuition, this is not what is recommended. So we see there's the strict legal, technical requirements or prohibitions, and then there's a certain das of the Torah, where a person should be sensitive. Okay, is what I'm doing also within the expectations of those who are sensitive to the spirit of the law? I want to share with you one more issue, and this is a fascinating subject. This issue appeared in a Torah journal called Mevakshe Torah, Kovetz Mevakshe Torah. And it was a letter that Rabbi Yashiv wrote on Zayin Tammuz Tafshin Memhei, a month after he wrote the tshuva regarding, in response to the Kalva Rebbe, whether you should say Shema Yisrael after davening. So, if I were to ask, Rabbi Yashiv says, saying Shema after davening to remember the Kedoshim, bad idea. Making a monument in the cemetery for Holocaust survivors, bad idea. What's wrong with saying Shema? In our generation, we're not capable of legislation. So they asked Rabbi Yashiv the following shaila. I want to ask you, what would you think Rabbi Yashiv said? This is a month after Rabbi Yashiv responded to the Kal of a Rebbe. Now, is there anything wrong with saying Shema? If I wanted to say Shema after davening, could I? Why not? It's Torah. It's a pasuk in Chumash. What could be wrong with telling people, everyone, let's get together and say a pasuk in Chumash? No, Rabbi Yashiv said you can't do that. So they asked Rabbi Yashiv, and it was brought up. Can we legislate to say certain prayers? Let's say.
Isn't that like saying Shiurim at the end of davening, or
So again, nobody ever legislated that after every single tefillah, every shul should say Shiurim. If someone happens to be sick, you're allowed to daven for someone who's sick. Baruch Hashem, we don't say it every single day. They asked Rabbi Yashiv, on the 9th day of Sivan, Rabbi Yashiv got the following letter, and he responded as follows. Tisha B'Av is coming up. We mourn many tragedies on Tisha B'Av. Some great Rabbanim composed Kinnus to recite on Tisha B'Av. As we know, you look in the Art Scroll Kinnus, you have a Kinot from Reb Schwab, the Baba Rebbe, others. So they asked Rabbi Yashiv, is this a good idea? To recite a Kinot to commemorate those who perished in the Holocaust. What would you think Rabbi Yashiv said?
That's okay.
What would you think? Based on what we learned so far?
No, we can't legislate.
No, you can't do it. How could you legislate in our generation any kind of new tefillah? Who are we to make any kind of ruling? Rabbi Yashiv responded, this is very correct and important. Let's follow in the paradigm of the earlier generations who in the year 1096, Tatnu, in the year of the Crusades, they composed Kinnus for the Crusades, for the destruction of the Rhineland. And therefore, says Rabbi Yashiv, it's an excellent idea that Klal Yisrael should say a Kinnah to commemorate the Holocaust. However, Rabbi Yashiv says, it's going to be very unlikely that one rabbi will compose a Kinnah and every single Kehillah will say that Kinnah. So each shul and each Kehillah should say the Kinnah that works for them, that resonates with them, that's meaningful to them. And we'll all say that Kinnah until the great day that the Tzom HaChamishi, that the fast of Tisha B'Av is transformed into a Yom Tov for Klal Yisrael. That was the view of Rabbi Yashiv. Shema, bad idea. Monument for the Holocaust, bad idea. Kinnah for the Holocaust, good idea. Does that seem consistent? So, Rav Shach was very unhappy with this ruling. And by the Levaya of the Stipler, Reb Chaim Berman Reb Chaim Berman said to Rabbi Yashiv's son, Reb Shach is fuming. And it's very possible at the Levaya today, at the Stipler's Levaya, that's what he's going to talk about. More than the Stipler, he's going to talk about how the destruction of the Jewish people is these Rabbanim who are instituting a Kinnah to say about the Holocaust. And I don't know, I think Reb Shach is going to hold himself back because your father, Rabbi Yashiv, endorsed it, but I don't know how much longer Reb Shach is going to hold it in. And sure enough, at the Levaya of the Stipler, Reb Shach didn't say anything. However, 7 days later, they had a Yom HaZikaron for the Stipler in Panovich, And Reb Shach got up to the podium, to the bima, and he says, I am compelled to publicly speak out against what's taking place. Jews are making new takanos and new tefillos. You know what I have to say, Reb Shach? Oi! And then Reb Shach added another word. Oi! This is the destruction of the Jewish people. Today they're going to institute a kinnah. Tomorrow, a prayer group. And the next day, it's all over. We're not able to enact anything. We can only follow what our forefathers did. We can't even add one letter. I, Gedolim, and Rabbanim agree. They're all wrong.
Did Rabbi Yasha give a reason why he...
Okay, so let's see.
We don't have the power to do it.
Now.
No, why he said it was okay.
Well, what the Kinot.
Yeah.
A little while later, Rabbi Yashiv's son, the Rabbi Yashiv's grandson, visited Reb Shach. Rabbi Yashiv sent his grandson to visit Reb Shach, and Rabbi Yashiv's grandson was asked to show Reb Shach the letter Rabbi Yashiv wrote to the Kalev Rebbe, as if to say to Reb Shach, my Zayda, he's not a new vogue innovator. Look, the Admor of Kalev, he just wanted to establish the recitation of Shema Yisrael. What could be more harmless than saying Shema Yisrael after that? And that, Rabbi Yashiv said, is not allowed. So obviously, my Zayd Rabbi Yashiv is also a vanguard of Jewish tradition. But this he allowed. So the question is, so what's the difference? So says Rabbi Yashiv's grandson, my Zayda agrees with you, Reb Shach, that we're not able to innovate. However, my Zayda's psak was based on a very excellent precedent. And the precedent is as follows. What's the first thing we do every morning when we wake up? Even before we wash Negavaser, we say, Moida ani lefanecha. We say, Moida ani lefanecha. By the way, you know that women don't say Moida ani lefanecha? Women say Moida ani lefanecha. Moida is Lashon Nekeva. Moida is Lashon Zachar. So tell your wife, don't say Moida ani. Why? I shouldn't say Moida. No, say Moida ani. Who wrote Moida ani? Do you know that Moida ani is a very recent tefillah? It was written by a student of the Arizal named Rav Moshe ben Yehuda Machir. He wrote a sefer called Seder Hayom. I had the zechus, we were driving in the north, and my wife says, what's that kaver over there? And I said, what? And I see the Seder Hayom. So we stopped the bus. I had a bus. I was speaking on a trip to the north. This wasn't one of the planned cars. We stopped the bus. We all got out. And beautiful kever coming out of his kever is a spring of Mayim Chayim. So I said, the author of Moida Ani has unlimited Negel Wasser at all times. But in any event, he writes, what should you do on Tisha B'Av?
How long ago was that instituted?
About 400 years ago. Yeah, very recent, as in terms of tefillah.
So till then, nobody said anything when they were...
No. They said, it's very cold in here. No, I don't know. And then, this is the Tefillah Moida Ani. Now, the Seder Hayom writes, what should you do on Tisha B'Av? After you eat the Suda HaMafsakes, you look at number 8, you sit on the ground like a mourner. You take off your shoes. You accept the fast. You accept the Avelas. You go to the Beis HaKnesses. You sit by the mourners. Or you change your seat to a more degrading spot. And you sit silent. You read Kinnus. Or things that awaken sorrow. And you cry over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And you cry over the slaying of many Chachamim and Chasidim and children, and those who know how to wail should wail. Hayodeh lamar Kinnus yukain. If you know how to say Kinnus, lament. What kind of Kinnus? Bein ksuvay sal sefer, whether they're written in a book, bein me'elav, or what you wrote yourself, kafi chachmasai asher nazna kimbakirbai. So say Kinnus that are either legislated or that you wrote. U'mitzvah hi al kol adam lechaber kinim. There's a mitzvah for every individual to compose kinnis. V'loy marisam b'yom ha'marzeh, and to say it on this bitter day. U'tzedakah yechashiv loy. It will be considered a righteousness to him. V'nikra me'avlei Yishalayim u'kdoshea. You'll be considered from the mourners of Jerusalem. And if you're not capable of writing Kinnus, so say in the art scroll. In the art scroll already has 45 Kinnus. But that's for people who don't know how to write their own Kinnus. You know how to write your own Kinnus? Go for it. It's a mitzvah to do it. So says Rabbi Yashav, I'm not innovating by saying that it's all right to recite Kinnus that were composed by Reb Shimon Schwab and the Baba Rebbe and Reb Vosner. The Seder Hayom 400 years ago already wrote that it's a mitzvah for every individual to write Kinnus. Shema, we cannot innovate. We cannot add to the Seder of Tefillah. But Kinnus we already have from many hundreds of years ago that this is an admirable thing to do.
So this is Rabbi Eliashib against Madani?
What? No, so Rabbi Yosef is invoking this. You mean is Reb Shach against Madani?
Yeah.
No.
Or
No, so this was, plus by the way, there's an interesting Rashi in Divrei Hayamim, that when Yoshio HaMelech, remember Yoshio HaMelech was the king who inspired a nationwide tshuva movement. He grew up, and at a young age, he came to believe in the Torah. And then, unfortunately, he was slain in war. Paro Nechoy shot his body with 300 arrows. And they made a takana, Rashi says, that any time there's a difficulty for the Jewish people, that we should, any tragedy that we lament, along with it, we lament the tragedy of the death of Yoshio HaMelech. And says that Rashi, similar to what we do on Tisha B'Av, that we mention the Kinnus for those who perished during the Crusades, along with the other tragedies of Tisha B'Av. So similar to that, whenever we have tragedy, we mention the tragedy of Yoshio HaMelech. So again, from here we see that when it comes to Kinnus, it's given to us that we could add tragedies that are personal to us.
Did Rav Shach respond?
And Rav Shach, when he heard the Seder Hayom, that everyone should compose their own Kinnus, he was silent. So Rabbi Yashiv's grandson is walking down the steps. All of a sudden, in front of the window, Rav Shach calls, "Come back! Come back!" So they told Rabbi Yashiv's grandson that the Rav Shach wants you back. So he came running back. And Rav Shach said that when the Seder Hayom said that everyone should compose their own kinnah, what that means is everyone should compose their own kinnah, and everyone should say it to themselves. But not to legislate that this is everyone. We're now going to recite, Yankel Beryl's nursery rhyme kinnah that he wrote, in second grade. So says Reb Shach, I know the Seder Hayom says everyone should compose their own kinnah, but he never says we should legislate that kinnah. So how could Rabbi Yashiv say that everyone should say a kinnah for the Holocaust? And Rabbi Yashiv's grandson said, my Zayda never said that every shul should say the same kinnah. Rabbi Yashiv didn't say everyone has to say Rav Shimon Schwab's kinnah. Everyone has to say Rav Michal Ber Weissmandel's kinnah. Every kehila could do what they want. And Rav Shach says, I hear. So it seems like they came to some kind of consensus that you can have it that, okay, first we're going to say the kinnah that was written by Reb Lezer HaKalir, then we're going to say the kinnah written by the Rishonim, then we're going to say from Yehuda Levi, and then kinnah number 46 is Reb Shimon Schwab, and kinnah number 47 is Reb Michal Ber Weissmandel. No. It's Reb Yashiv is saying that it's appropriate to mourn the Holocaust on Tisha B'Av, and each kehillah should pick a kinnah that works for them. But there's no uniform. That's why in our shul, it depends on the year. Some years we'll say the Baba Rebbe, sometimes Reb Michal Ber Weissmandel. There have been times we said both. There have been times we're running late. I'll just speak about the Holocaust and we can't. But, there's no policy. It's not a set policy. That's the only thing. So, it comes out, and what we're learning is that there's a certain sensitivity that the poskim have, specifically to the weakness of our generation. That, like the Chazon Ish says, for our generation, the operating principle is silence. And even to institute that every shul should say Shema Yisrael, what could be wrong with saying Shema? It's not correct. And even a great personality like Kava Rebbe, perhaps felt that it was okay, but no, halachically it is not endorsed. And even to make a monument for the Holocaust, even though we can't say it's prohibited according to the letter of the law, but it's according to Das Torah, Ein Ruach Chachamim Noichemenu, better to do something that the living benefit from. By the way, so you say, but many shuls have a Holocaust memorial. Yeah? So I said, yeah, because that's something the living benefit from. Why? Because the guy who donated it gave $100,000 for the metal slab that cost $400. So that went to build the shul. So the living benefited from it, right? But conceptually, it seems like Rabbi Yashiv is of the opinion monuments are not really a Jewish thing. We're not going to protest. It's not prohibited, but it's not fundamentally. But even to go as so far as to say, like, who would have imagined what could possibly be lacking in reciting a Kinot for the Holocaust? Reb Shach did not go for it, right? And even Rabbi Yashiv, who allowed it, but it's only allowed in the context of every kahila should say something that resonates with them, but not to legislate that everyone has to say one specific kinah. But friends, the idea that in our generation we're not able to legislate, this is all part of the churban of how weak and how small that we've become. One of the reasons the Chazon Ish was not in favor of any added tefillos is he felt it was insulting to earlier generations, who the composers of the tefillah were men of divine inspiration, people who had Ruach HaKodesh, people who had prophecy, who they recognized how each word effectuates in the heavens. And what now in our generation, we're just going to have a eloquent writer write something up and we're going to stick it. We're going to stick in basically a amateur prayer in middle of these prayers that literally shake the heavens. It's sort of insulting, and it shows a lack of appreciation for the power of our regular tefillos. But be it as it may, this was the thinking process of Rabbi Yashiv, that there's certain things that are not asur me'ikar hadin, but nevertheless, what we learn, a few very important principles, it's not enough to say that something is asur. In other words, not only something which goes against halacha is prohibited, even something that has no basis in Chazal is not allowed to be instituted. Like saying the Shema, like making a monument. However, when it comes to the Kinnus on Tisha B'Av, since there's precedent, based on the fact that the Seder Hayom already writes that each person should compose their own tefillah, there's basis for each kehillah to do something according to what works for that particular kehillah. We should all be zoicha to the return of Hashiva Shoftenu Kvar Rishayna, the return of all the great leaders of the Jewish people who were capable of making real legislation. And Be'ezus Hashem, with the coming of Mashiach, we won't have to say any of the Kinnus, and we should only have Simchas and Mesuras Tovos Lanu L'Chol Yisrael. Amen. Yeah.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.